healthy and safe at home or wherever you are in the world. And I want to say that thanks for joining us. Little bit of a spoiler alert, Gary will be joining us today. And I want to say that we are honored to be with you in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty. And we look forward to sharing time with you in our shared sacred space together today. Hey, Gary, I think your mic is on. So if you could, perfect. And we'll call her back up in just a second. So the things we want to do in our time together today in sacred space is number one, we're going to set our sacred space. Number two, we'll have our talk about the overall topic for the week. And the topic for this week will be the physics of discernment and shame, and how those two factors play into a healing cycle, an inner emotional healing cycle within us. We'll have an exercise related to the story and the talk, and then we'll close sacred space. So we'll start by setting our sacred space today. And to begin that, I want to say that what we want to do here in setting sacred space is that our intention is to have a space, to make a space, which is devoid of fear, threat, and control, in order for us to open to higher guidance from within ourselves, however we may define higher guidance. It could be intuition, it could be flashes of insight from the muse, or however we think about that. But the idea here is to create and then be in a safe sanctuary space for us all to relax and surrender with no danger or threat, so that we can partake of the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together as a group. And in opening sacred space today, I will propose that we all follow the 4 principles of Presidian sacred space. The first is confidentiality. Standard Vegas rules: what happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Now, of course, here being online with live streams, it's public, open to everyone. The replay will be public. The way we do confidentiality here is via anonymization. So if you are chatting, if you're asking questions, which you don't have to, and we'll get to that in a moment. But if you're doing that and you would like to be anonymous, and you don't have to be anonymous, but if you would like to, the way you would do that here is you would come into the Crowdcast stream. It'll ask you to register, and then you go into your edit profile feature and just change your username to Donald Duck, Mickey Mouse, Harry Potter, what have you, and then continue participating anonymously. So the second principle is that we will follow the principle of no threat or controlling or fixing or tough love. So no threat, no controlling, no fixing, no tough love, no intervening, no reaching in to cure you for your own good. And the idea here is that there's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly well-intentioned. But because that is of the provenance of controlling, regardless of intention, if I try to control you, then it is of the realm of the profane. And again, as we always say, profane is not bad. Profane is just profane. And when we come into sacred space exclusively for just an hour or two a week here, as a group, the idea is that we want to be here in order to do the things that we can only do in sacred space. Right? So if you want to help someone or have a debate or talk about that stuff, we can do that later outside in profane space, but not here, in order to keep the quality of sacred space so we can do all our business that we want to do in sacred space. So here we are holding space for each other to be however we are, with no fear or intention of intervening or changing. So if we're afraid, we're afraid. If we're anxious, we're anxious. If we're happy and relaxed, we're happy and relaxed. And if we're any of those things and we feel fine about that, then we feel fine about that. Or if we're any of those things and we feel terribly awful, like a horrible person, why am I afraid? I'm so weak. Why am I happy? I'm so callous, right? In terms of all the stuff going on in the world. So we are how we are, and we are okay with that. We hold space for that. And to even be in a space where we can be however we are with no fear or threat of intervention or someone controlling us, that's a different kind of quality of space. And that is part of the magic of sacred space. The third principle is no commerce. So nothing may be sold or recommended or suggested. So even if it's for free, it's like, oh, you should check out this book for that problem you mentioned, right? Even that is, however well-intentioned, is of the nature of control and threat. Because if you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going through a really tough time, and I say, well, try this book, the hidden implication or the implied threat is that if you don't at least look it up and check it out, you may be missing out, right? And that is a veiled threat. So no commerce. I can't sell you anything. Gowrie can't sell you anything. Please don't sell things to each other, or even recommendations for free things, for third-party things. We are here for your energy, not for the things you bring. We are here for what you are, not for what you do or provide. For your essence and presence and attention, not for your functionality. Okay. And the fourth, last but not least, no expectation of participation. So there's no pressure to do anything. You can chat, not chat. You can be anonymous, not anonymous. You can ask questions, not ask questions. You can share with your friends or not share with your friends. Doesn't matter. Again, the nourishment comes from the held space and your presence and attention, from what you are, not from what you do or provide. And all of us together will tend to amplify that. So this is what I propose. And if you are not okay with that, that's totally okay. But we want to give you a moment now to withdraw from the group and make your selection. And that's fine, right? We will still catch up with you later in profane space. We'll still hang out, no worries. But the point is there's no fear, threat, or control for you to even come into sacred space. You come and go as you please. So I will give everyone a moment now to make your selection as to whether you would like to continue with us for now. Okay. And so then for the rest of us now, we will move together now into sacred space. And as we come into sacred space together, I will just remind everyone of the 4 principles we would like to follow to maintain the sacred space: confidentiality / anonymization, no fear, threat, or control, no commerce, no recommendations, and no expectation of participation. Welcome to sacred space, everyone. All right, so let's get started. So we are in sacred space, and let's start with our topic for this week. Now, the topic for this week is the physics of discernment and shame. Shame is a very powerful word. It's a very powerful phenomenon. I don't use it often because although it is at the root of many things that are happening, the minute you say the word shame, there is shame about having shame or even talking about shame. So everyone tends to curl up into a pretzel, turn green, and fall over. So I just don't even use the word. But I think we've been together now for long enough, we're in it far enough where when a story is bringing it forward, we can start to touch the edges of it a little bit and look into the physics of it a little bit more. So in this session, our weekly fairy tale brainstorm brought us to a meditation on how our inner wounds are healed and what is the role of discernment, shame, and even grief in the process of that healing journey. So you have a wound. We're not even talking about avoiding the wound. It's done, right? What's done is done. We have this wound from our childhood or whatever. How does it tend to unravel and uncoil and heal over time within us? What are the physics of that? And what is the role of discernment? What is the dynamic of shame? And what is the role of grief in that process? Okay. So Gowrie has selected a story from the Indian Jataka tradition. And I think what we'll do now is we'll invite Gowrie up if her internet is holding up where she is, and she will introduce the story to us, tell the story, and then we'll continue our exploration from there. Hello.
Hi, Artie.
How are you?
Hi. I'm
Good.
good.
You sound great. You look great.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Do you want to tell us about the story you've selected?
Yeah, so it's a folk tale, but it comes from a tradition of a Buddhist pantheon of stories called Jataka tales. And Jataka is traditionally, it's usually the previous births and lives of Bodhisattva or Buddha, and in various forms and in various ways. But yeah, they're also interspersed among them are animal stories, folk stories. Some of them even mostly actually used as allegories, for didactic purposes, for teachings, for Buddhist teachings and all of that. But some fascinatingly bizarre, as I can say, stories where it's really hard to kind of make sense of them allegorically as well, right? So it's an interesting collection of literature. So I found this coming up for me so strongly this week. So I thought, okay, let's explore this.
Yay! Okay, good. Do you want to tell the story?
Yeah, we can start.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. I will get off screen.
Right. So this story is called Prince Wicked and Other Grateful Animals. So there's a story about a person who's called Prince Wicked. So right at the start, we have a king whose son is named Prince Wicked. And true to his name, he is cruel and he's fierce and he abuses everybody. If it's not abuse, he's always coming to blows with everyone. And this is a prince who's not liked by anyone. He's like a grit in the eye to everyone inside the palace and outside. And people talk about it, saying they're worried. I mean, if this prince is behaving this way when he's prince, how would he be when he becomes king? So there is this kind of discontent and uneasiness among people, but they don't know what to do about it. And one day, when the prince went swimming in the river, his servants had accompanied him, but while he was swimming, suddenly there was a great storm and suddenly it grew very dark. And the servants who were swimming with him thought to themselves that we could just leave him here and he could drown. And they just swam back ashore and left him. And when they came to the shore, the other servants who hadn't gone in asked them, "Oh, where's the prince?" And they pretended that they hadn't seen. So they said, "Oh, he's in here. We thought he'd already left because we didn't see him. It was very dark." And, because it's something that the prince could easily have done, they didn't question these servants either. So they just assumed that he'd left for the palace by himself. And when they reached the palace, the king asked them, "Where's my son?" And they said, "Oh, hasn't he reached the palace already? We thought he had left before us." And then the king, sent out search parties all over the place. They looked everywhere and they couldn't find him. And meanwhile, the prince was in the river, and he was the storm had caused the river to flood, and he was being swept downstream. And he was very afraid. He couldn't keep up with the storm or the flood. And he was struggling and he was afraid that he would drown. He started to cry. And eventually he found a log that was kind of flowing with the river downstream. And he managed to hold on to that, get onto the log and sit on it, helpless, just being flown by the river. And the storm was so great that the flood had just rushed into to the banks where there were holes and nests of other animals. One of them was a snake, which had a hole in the bank, and water rushed into it, and the snake was just pushed out. And the snake happened to find the same log and got onto the log to take support from it. And then there was another rat that was, pushed down by the flood. And the rat did the same thing. It took protection on the log. And then there was, as the river kind of kept flowing and as they went downstream, there was a cottonwood tree on the bank that by the force of the river just broke and fell into the river. And there was a parrot that had made a nest in it. And the parrot couldn't keep up with the storm and the winds and everything, so it became tired and decided to rest on the same log where the prince and these two other creatures were. So this was going on for a while when the river turned around a bend. And there was a poor man who had a hut on the bank of the river. And this man had been walking to and fro on the bank, listening to the storm and worrying what was going on. And he heard the cries of the prince. He heard him crying and he thought, oh, poor man, I must save him. And he called out to the prince when he spotted him and he said, I'm going to save you. He jumped into the river and then swam to the log, pushed it to the bank. And he realized when he was pushing it to the bank that there were these other creatures on it. And as soon as the log came close to the bank, the prince jumped out onto the bank and kind of was so glad to be in dry ground again. And the poor man took all the other creatures, the snake, the rat, and the parrot, and took them to his hut. He started a fire first, made sure everyone was warm, but he first put the animals close to the fire to make sure they were dry, and then went to attend to the prince. And then he brought food, and he served the animals first, because he thought, they needed attention first. They were the weaker creatures. He gave them food, and then he went to attend to the prince. Now, looking at this, the prince was angry because he thought that he deserved to be treated, special. He deserved to get all the treatment first because he was prince. And this poor man didn't care about any of that, and he was treating the animals first. So he hated the man, but he didn't say anything. And all of them rested for a few days in the hut until the storm died out and until everything got better. And then the snake first decided to leave. It went up to the poor man and said, Father, you've treated me really well. You've been very kind. So I'd like to return, the favor in the way that anytime you need gold, all you have to do is come to the place where I live and call out my name, and I'll come to you and show you a place where there's gold buried, and you can have all of that. It's all yours. And then the snake left. And the rat came up to the man and said, thank you so much for your kindness. And I promise anytime you need money, all you have to do is come up to me where I live, call out my name, and I will show you where a treasure is buried and you can have all the money. And then the parrot came to him. And the parrot said, well, I can't give you silver or gold, but if ever you need the choicest rice, you have to just come and ask, and I'll make sure all of my family and everyone I know will come together to pick the choicest rice for you. And the poor man said, thank you very much. And he sent all of them away. And then the prince came up. And he'd seen the animals promise all these things. So he said in the same tone, my dear man, you've saved my life. I'm grateful to you. So if you ever happen to come to my palace, meet me and I'll reward you with great riches. And the man said, all right. And a few days passed. And one day he thought, well, all these people, all the 4 people I've saved their lives and they've promised something in return. I'd like to check if, they will keep their promises. So he set out. He first went to the place where the snake lived. And he stood outside the hole and called out to the snake. And the snake immediately darted out and was very happy to greet the man. I said, would you like to take the gold and I can show you where it's buried? And the poor man said, well, not now. I just came to check in. But if I ever need the gold, I will remember. And they exchanged some pleasantries and then he left. He went on to the place where the rat lived and he called out to the rat. And the rat came out all eager to help and very grateful, very respectful, and told the man, if you need the money, I can show you where it's buried. And the man said the same thing again. Not now, I don't need it right now, but thank you very much. I will take you up on that when I need it. And then he moved on to the parrot. And then he called out to the parrot. The parrot came eagerly and said the same thing. Do you need rice? I can call my family. We'll all go out and pick the rice for you. And he saw that the parrot really meant it and was eager. He was happy. And he said, not right now, but I'll come back to you. And after this, he went to the palace. And by now, the old king had died and the prince had become king. And when he went to the city, he saw that there was a procession and the king was riding a white elephant on the road. And the moment the king saw this poor man, the thought that came to him was that, oh, this man's come to get his rewards. And he will now tell everyone how he saved my life. And I can't have that. So he immediately ordered his servants to seize him and tie him up, march him across the streets, out of the city, beat him up in every corner, take him out of the city and chop his head off, so that no one ever finds out that this man had saved his life. And the servants had to do what they were told. So they seized him, tied him up. And as they were beating him up at every corner of every street, the poor man strangely did not cry out. He only kept saying, it is better to save lives of poor helpless creatures than save the life of a prince. And when he kept saying that, there were people in the crowd, some of the wise people, were curious, and they stopped the servants and the poor man and asked him, what do you mean by that? Why do you talk about saving lives of creatures and saving the life of a prince? What is the story here? And then the poor man told them what happened and how he had saved the life of these creatures and the prince, and this is the consequence, and this is how he was paying for it. And this made the people livid, because, I mean, how do you reward someone like this when they've saved your life and you just get them killed? So the way they looked at it and what they said was, how can we trust this king who repays in this way to someone who's saved their life? If this is what he can do to this poor man, what guarantee do we have that he won't have us all killed? And when they realized this, they were angry, and they took stones and arrows and they attacked the king and killed him instantly. And then they made the poor man king, and he ruled over them kindly and wisely. And while he was king, one day he remembered the promises of the other creatures, and he decided to take up on it. He went to where the snake lived, called out to the snake, and the snake came up and said, would you like the gold? And he said, yes, very much, thank you. And I've come with my servants to carry the gold to the palace. But this time I'd like you to come with me. And then after they dug up the gold and took it with them, he then went to the place where the rat lived, called to the rat, and he said the same thing to the rat. I'd like to take the money that you had offered, but this time I'd like you to come with me. And then he went to the parrot. And the parrot came in again, and the same thing. The parrot offered to get the choicest rice for him. And he said, I don't need the rice right now, but if ever there is a need, I'll come to you. But also, I'd like you to come with me to the palace. And the parrot accompanied him. And they all went back to the palace with treasure chests of money and gold. And he put all the money and gold in the treasury of the palace. And then he had a tube of gold made for the snake, so that the snake could rest inside the tube. And that was a separate place for the snake in the palace. And then he got a nest made of gold for the rat. And then he had a cage made of gold for the parrot. So they could all live in the palace in comfort. And then they all lived happily after that. So that's the story. Artie, would you like to come back on?
All right. Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you. You can hear me okay, right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love that story. Thank you. So if I may, I would love to ask, where do you enter into that story?
Yeah, I mean, the reason it just came up so strongly for me was that there was this contrast between the animals in the story and this character of Prince Wicked. And as you always say in these story reading sessions, that they are all part of us, right? All these characters we see in a story can be read as a different part of our own inner self. And when I was reading the story, there was these animals and the prince, and they had such contrasting attitudes. And there's also this direct honesty in the way the animals dealt with the poor man. And it kind of reminded me, and there's this interpretation that you give that animals usually, especially friendly animals in stories, are symbolic of the body. And to me, it felt, I mean, I was reminded of what you say about how our body and our feelings don't lie. And they're, direct and honest in their dealings with us. And how we choose to kind of either ignore or not pay attention to that. But the body itself is directly honest, right? So that is something that kind of resonated with me in the story. And then it made me curious as to why then was the wicked archetype behaving in this certain way. I mean, what were his motivations to do what he did or behave the way he did? So that's where I think I brought that to you, and I said we need to explore this. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. And of course, my first reaction, as it is every week, is, huh? What's the point of the story? I don't get it.
Classic kind of allegorical tale where you say, look at the animals, if they can be so kind and nice, why can't you be kind and nice?
Right.
So,
you bad boy, right? Yeah, and it's almost like, the typical allegory is like, there's Prince nudge, nudge, wink, wink, Prince Wicked. So don't be like Prince Wicked. And yeah. So, I mean, I really enjoyed this story. And then the themes that came up for me, in our brainstorm together, really did center around the body and this power of, I mean, the big theme that came up for me was this theme of discernment. Like judgment, like good judgment, good discernment, the ability to see and separate one thing from another. And I'll go through my notes here now, and I'll talk about what I mean by that. But then also like the nature of wounds being driven by shame in a way that is very subtle and not talked about. But if you look at it, you can see it. Once you have eyes to see, you have this lens, you see it everywhere. Okay, should I dive into some of my notes?
Give out your interpretation, and I'll come back and join you again in some time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as Gary has already said, the way if you're new to Sacred Sundays, or how we do healing, the way we read dreams, stories, fairy tales is mythopoetically, which means that we regard every major actor in a story as being a symbol of a different part of your own inner self. And then we hit the play button, we see how the video kind of unwinds or unspools. And then you look out for who's doing what to whom, what the symbols are. And this is all a diorama of what is going on inside your own inner self. Okay. So here you can obviously read the story allegorically or symbolically. So to read a story allegorically is to say it's good or bad, there's a lesson, you should, which is more of the profane. Right? So the allegory is to get you to be a certain way. So I'm threatening you, I'm putting you into fear, don't be like Prince Wicked or else. And of course, I'm threatening you and trying to control you. Or you could read it symbolically, which is to say, this entire story is simply a diorama of a state of affairs that is so. It's not telling you to be Prince Wicked and not telling you to be any one of the animals or the poor man. They are all of you. You are all of them in different parts of you, right? If I told you a story about your heart, liver, and lungs, you wouldn't say, well, I only want the liver, I don't want the heart and lungs. That doesn't work. You need all of them. So to read something allegorically is to read it in a more sacred manner, where you look at it, not taking any lessons as to fear, threat, and control, but just looking at it and seeing what insights come up on their own. It's almost like spending time with a sacred text, which is what all of these stories are. And also, when your dreams come to you, they are a form of sacred text, which can be universal, but they come to you very intimately and personally in the night when you're dreaming, or during the day when you're having daydreams and fantasies and visions. And it is kind of a signal characteristic of a world steeped in the profane, that when we talk about our dreams, we talk about our daydreams and fantasies, everyone disregards them and says, well, what good is that, right? How are you going to make money doing that? Get your head out of the clouds. In other words, it has nothing to do with the profane. It doesn't help me control anyone, threaten anyone, or put fear into anyone. It doesn't help me get money. It doesn't help me do any of these things. So it's quote unquote useless. So here, of course, we're going to read the story symbolically, not allegorically, since we are in sacred space. So the simplest reading allegorically is to say, be like the poor man, don't be like Prince Wicked. But symbolically, they are both a part of you, as we've already said. Prince Wicked does ultimately die, i.e. transform. So when you see death in one of these venues, it's a symbol of transformation, right? The caterpillar dies, goes into the cocoon, and then comes out transformed into the butterfly. So the thing is, Prince Wicked is a part of you. It's done. It's a description of a state of affairs that is so. So you are like Prince Wicked. We're not saying you should or should not be like Prince Wicked. You are like Prince Wicked. I am like Prince Wicked. So the point is not to be like, oh, you have a cut on your arm. You have this Prince Wicked bad part of you. Let's figure out how to not get a cut. So, be more careful, not get a cut next time. The story rather symbolically starts with, look, you already have the cut. It's done. And the question there from there forward is to say, well, how does this cut heal? How does the process of healing happen? Right? We're all jerks. We're all sort of hubristic. We're thoughtless. We all have a Prince Wicked inside of us. But what is the process by which this Prince Wicked part of us transforms and heals? So in the beginning, Prince Wicked is browbeating all the servants and the subjects, which is symbolic of a bully factor within you, right? The Prince Wicked is the one that says, Well, you didn't do all your chores, so no dessert until you do your chores, and then you do all your chores, and Prince Wicked will say something like, well, if you finish them on time, I must have not set the bar high enough. So they move the goalposts and raise the bar. And it's, I mean, those of you who have had, parents or teachers who are like this, you just know it's hell. And even if it served you right and you're like, a billionaire now, you still have this wound that eats you alive inside. That's why you've sort of progressed so far in the realm of the profane. So this is a bully factor within you that is abusing other forces within you, abusing body, abusing money, all these other forces. And the triggering factor that begins the transformation is that they are in the river. And water in a dream is a symbol of insight. And they're in this river, and a huge storm whips up, turning the river into a flood. So it is a flood of insight, triggered by a storm, a big event in your life, like a pandemic, or by a financial disaster, by a loss of a loved one, by a painful breakup, get fired from your job, what have you. And because of this, this part of you is plunged into the river and swept along violently by these forces of emotion and insight, this force of the water. All of your life forces, the servants, abandon you, they scatter, because you don't have a sort of a deep connection or bond with them. You just use them. It's like your body actually typically doesn't abandon you until there's a last resort. But those people who, sometimes we abuse our body, we overwork our bodies, we don't listen to our bodies. We think of our bodies as only, lovable if they look a certain way, even though your body is everything. Your body, you can enjoy wine, you can enjoy sex, you can enjoy the sound of the rain, you can enjoy intellectualization, reading, sunsets, all because of your body. And yet we look at our body and we treat it like, an old donkey we whip, saying, yeah, it doesn't matter anything else you do for me, unless you're hot, thin, and pretty and handsome, I'm not going to sort of pay you any mind. And even then I'll say, do even more, right? I move the goalposts on my body. So you are like a Prince Wicked in that situation. And when you get flooded by insight, all the forces abandon you. They're like, okay, we need to just leave this guy to cook, right? And transform. And in this near brush with death transformation, because in the first encounter, Prince Wicked doesn't die, right? So the flood doesn't kill him significantly. This is not an accident. The first flood, the first flood always puts you into deep contact with these deeper forces. And then the trial, right, or the expectation that everyone within you is watching for is how do you react? Do you realize, oh, I've been such a jerk, I'm sorry? Or do you brute force push even further, right? Which shows a lack of judgment, a lack of discernment. And it's fascinating here to see the 4 key elements this Prince Wicked part of you comes into contact with when beset by this storm of transformation. Snake, rat, parrot, and the poor man. So let's talk about these 4. So these 3 animals are symbols of the body. So when you see animals in dreams, they typically symbolize like the embodiment side. So right from the get-go, there's this feeling that when swept off by transformation, you are forced into re-engaging with certain aspects of the body and embodiment. When you push yourself too hard at work, you get a flu, or you get backache, or you get a nervous breakdown, right? It gradually escalates until you kind of get the message and start reflecting to see like what's actually going on. On the log, swept on by these forces of insight, we have 4 players, right? The self, as we know from Jung and other thinkers, is a quaternity. Self has 4 elements. And here we have the 3, the snake, the rat, and the parrot, and Prince Wicked is the 4th. Okay, So the intellect is like out of control, hubristic, bullying, and he's outnumbered by the forces of the body. It's 3-1. Snake is typically a symbol of the divine feminine. I won't go into detail here, but in Genesis, right, Eve is associated with the snake, the feminine. It's vilified in that because it's the patriarchal, monotheistic God Yahweh sort of taking over all the matriarchal goddess religions of that period. So the snake and the goddess are blamed, lambasted, and exiled. In the Indian tradition, the snake is the Kundalini, right? And we talk about that in the 7 chakras talk that we've done in this series. But the Ini, the I at the end of Kundalini, is feminine. So Kundalini is a snake, but it's the divine feminine. So the force ascending, right, the ladder of the chakras is a snake. And the snake eventually coils back to bite its own tail, this Ouroboros. Let me just give you the people who always ask the spelling. So I'll dump this in the chat. Ouroboros. And Gary can put that in the Facebook as well. So the divine feminine is on the log with this Prince Wicked. And then the rat, which is a symbol typically of resourcefulness. We definitely have like the rat in the Chinese zodiac. The rat can get to places where no one else can. It is unassuming. It takes its time. It's sort of action in the background, but very powerful, cumulative, gradual, brooding action in the background. A rat's teeth are actually able to chew through steel cable. They have, when you study rats, you realize there are these stories of rats being able to chew through even steel, but slowly and gradually, bit by bit by bit. No one sees the rat. So in this sense, the rat is even capable in its resourcefulness of making its own time and space. And you're like, when did that happen? And it's like the rat was there all along and you didn't know it. It was in its own sort of shard or fragment of time and space. So for you, this is the part of you that's brooding, that's working in the background that you don't notice, but is moving the ball forward or thinking. So when you're sitting and thinking and brooding about something, chewing on a problem, it's your rat power. Okay. So we have the divine feminine, the sort of cycle of life, the resourcefulness. And the parrot is of the air. Parrot is a bird. Without getting to the specifics of parrot specifically, just bird in general is of the air realm. It's a symbol of the spiritual, the abstract, the more intellectual realm. So in this flood, the water goes down and flushes out the full cycle of life, the Kundalini, resourcefulness, and brings down spiritual discernment, even from the tree, right? Because the parrot can just fly away. Why does the parrot fly down? You can say, well, it's the storm or whatever, that's fine. It's because symbolically, when this flood comes through you and turns your entire life upside down, it is putting and tossing specific elements of your own inner self, your inner powers, into a cooking pot for blending, transformation, and to cook a new sort of dish, a new kind of alchemy, if you will. So the full cycle of life, resourcefulness, the divine feminine, and spiritual discernment, right? It literally knocks over the tree, the world tree of the parrot, and brings down the parrot as well, all into deep engagement together, all into the cooking pot, eventually of the poor man's hut with the fire, right? The fire of cooking, to blend and come into transformation, mutual transformation, because they all transform. They're all, the 3 animals are at the palace by the end, which is exactly what happens when you have a flood, like big disaster in your life, a loss, a pandemic or whatever. Everything gets tossed together and remixed with no controlling architectural blueprint. It's like we have no idea where we're going, like the pandemic. There's completely uncharted waters. And the trick is, what will be transformed during this cooking phase? And it matters how you play your hand, right? In the pandemic, it matters how you play your hand. Integrity matters, words matter, leadership matters, all the other stuff. So just like with Noah's Ark and the flood, this story is almost like a creation flood story, right? It's a creation story in the sense that the raven story from last week was a creation story. It brings the poor man in touch with the powers of Kundalini, which is gold, insight, right? Gold is a symbol of insight. The rat is resourcefulness, so it brings you to money, ego, power, right? And parrot, which is this sort of, so parrot in the negative, bird in the negative is like, you're too abstract, you're too intellectual, you're not grounded at all. But when it's grounded and embodied, so the intellect is grounded in the body, it leads to good, incisive power of judgment. Said another way, discernment. Okay, and this is the boon, the gift that the power gives. That the power gives. So the snake offers gold, insight. The rat offers money, ego, power through resourcefulness. And the parrot, who comes down to join this fest, okay, offers discernment and the power of good judgment. And the symbol here, the reason I say that is that the gift he gives to the old man is not a buried bag of rice, like the buried money or the buried gold. The gift he gives the old man is, I will call to my cousins and other birds of the air to go out and select the choicest grains of rice from all the rice stalks all around and gather this. And in many different traditions, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, the symbol of gathering grains, picking lentils, separating wheat from the chaff is a symbol of discernment, of judgment within yourself, So this parrot is within you. And so this is all insight, money, discernment at the body, instinctive, intuitive level, because they're all animals. This is what the spoiled brat of Prince Wicked is forced to re-engage with and confront. To see the examples of good judgment, discernment, resourcefulness, and insight. So he's literally cooking in a hut by the fire with all three of these figures. And the example of the old man, which we'll get to. And this is his trial, and he fails. He fails to transform. And so then, of course, later, we take a crack at the piñata again, and then he does transform later. He dies and is replaced by the poor man, okay, as king. If we move to the man in the hut, this poor man is the exile. He's living in the forest, not even upriver. It's like downriver around the next bend, in the bad neighborhood, right? And so he is this exiled frog figure. He is from the story of the Frog King that we always tell. He's poor. He's in a hut. He's downriver, and it shows then when you have this frog in exile. This poor unkempt man, just like Odysseus in Book 6 of the Odyssey we talked about, right, when he comes out all shipwrecked, looking like a frog, and retrieves the ball for Princess Nausicaa. And also, this is guys like the Neverwash character, the soldier in that Neverwash fairy tale from several weeks back. So when you have this frog separated and exiled, it's a symbol that there's a wound. There's a wound. Why is Prince Wicked wicked? I mean, the first giveaway is that you have this prince named Prince Wicked. So right off the bat, there's a wound. And then you see the exile frog. And so you see the sort of contours of the wound. There's a Prince Wicked who has been estranged from the old man, who is himself the carrier of discernment. And we'll talk about that more in a second. So why is the prince wicked? It's because of this wound of estrangement with discernment. And how do these wounds tend to happen? We know from just everything else we do, my whole healing practice is basically about this. These emotional wounds come from a sense of shame. Right? The lightning bolt of shame is sent down from your parents, messages you got in early life, in your childhood. And you have this sense of shame where not guilt, right? Guilt is I did something wrong, but I can make up for it. Shame is different from guilt in that shame is more a sense of it's not about what you do, it's about what you are. And the sense that there is something intrinsically wrong with me that I can't do anything about. And that I really, like when you commit a petty crime, you can sort of, cancel out your guilt by doing time in jail or whatever. When you commit a truly heinous crime, right, people look at you like, it doesn't matter how many times you say sorry, there is something the F wrong with you intrinsically that you would do such a thing, right? But you have everyday feelings of shame as well, like I'm not good enough, I'm the wrong gender, I'm the wrong ethnicity, I'm the wrong socioeconomic class, or the wrong sexual orientation, blah, 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 okay? So there's Prince Wicked, he is in shame, and we'll see a sort of a stunning illustration of this by the end of the story, proof that his wound is from shame. And so here, though, in the hut, the nature of things here is that because of this wound, the emerging masculine is out of order, right? The prince should ascend to the kingship, everything should be well, but because of this wound, he ascends, and then he is transformed, and then the old man, the frog, comes back and ascends the throne because of this wound, and that's okay. That's sort of what the story is telling us, is that is a valid sense of circumambulation. So the superpower of the older man, because he is the frog, is basically the power of discernment, good judgment. The first thing he does is he rescues the prince and animals, okay, which is an extraordinary act because it shows that this part of you, this old man part of you, is almost supernaturally comfortable in the waters of the storming, surging river of insight, whereas the prince is not. Okay. And the extraordinary thing that happens is that, first, let's just say, when the log gets down over the bend of the river and passes the old man's hut, unlike the other four characters on the log, the old man is not in the river. Right? All this flood of transformation, this pandemic, everything, has not actually reached the level of where the old man is. He is still even further above it. You can read this to say, even in the midst of everything, there's still a part of you that is above all of it. Right? And, watching. And in this case, because of his power of discernment, because he is the frog, he has gone through grief, he has been in the hut exiled for all this time. He has this extraordinary power of compassion and the ability to navigate the even storm-surged waters of insight. This is extraordinary. And he does it willingly. He's not swept in the storm. He's up on dry land. He's perfectly fine in his hut. Everything's fine. He sees, and then he willingly jumps into the river. It's absolutely extraordinary. Okay. The other detail is that he swims out to the log in the middle of this raging storm and pushes the log back to shore. And get this detail, he's the old man. Right? Prince Wicked is this like strapping, handsome prince, right? The sort of golden child of the village. And so the question this begs is, if the old man, the poor old man, can swim out and bring the log back, why couldn't the prince do it? Right? Who's presumably stronger. And the reason why the prince couldn't do it, because he would save his own bacon in an instant if he could, right? He's this selfish Prince Wicked. Obviously, these are not physical waters, right? These are the waters of transformation and insight. The prince is unable to handle it, and the old man is able to swim in these waters. So when you're like, don't be like Prince Wicked, be like the poor old man, it's like, no, you're both. You have a part of you that can't handle it, and you have a part of you that can, right? That's the point. Joseph Campbell used to say something along the lines of this beautiful thing he used to say, where he would say, and I'm paraphrasing, the difference between a lunatic and a mystic is that a lunatic has been thrown, cast into the waters of the eternal. And I'm paraphrasing and adding my own here, where he has seen this Joycean aesthetic arrest, right? Beatific vision of like everything. And he can't handle it, right? He goes insane. He has a psychotic break and he cracks, right? Just like, modern day people who like, they think they're just partying and they do LSD or ayahuasca, and they have this terrifying sort of horrific experience because they're thrown into the waters through this sort of brute force drug sort of log, pushing you into the river, and they can't handle it and they crack. Whereas, to continue with this paraphrase of Joseph Campbell, the mystic has had training, preparation, and he willingly dives into these exact same waters, and he is able to swim. So the old man is like the mystic. He can swim out and get the log, no problem. So right here from this, I mean, if the fact that there's an old man on the edge of the forest wasn't enough of a giveaway clue at this point, with all of our mythopoetic, vocabulary and kung fu powers that we've accumulated in this pandemic series, Sacred Series journey, this should be the ultimate sort of even more confirming giveaway. So he can swim out, get the log, and bring it back. So he's the one you want to watch. Okay, whatever this guy does, this is like the example, right? Of like, whoa, this is like, I have a power like this in me. Let me learn more about this power. It's fabulous. So he's the one you want to watch. What he does is the guidance, is the insight from this old man who is literally unlike any other part of you. He's able to navigate the flooding, terrifying waters of destroying, purging insight and inner power. So he brings the log back. What does he do next? We're very interested in what he does next at this point. The floodwaters don't reach him. He's above this level of transformation. He jumps in willingly anyway. And once he brings the log back, he reflexively, first of all, he lights a fire. So he kindles the fire of transformation, which is an important detail. There could have been a fire burning already and just say, oh, you just put him by the fire. It's like, no, the story takes the effort to say, no, he starts a fire. So he brings you all together and he gets the fire going for pressure and containment to cook you in the hut. And he reflexively takes care of the animals first, right? Embodiment is the first priority, not intellect. Okay. Then he deals in good faith with each animal and even with the prince. Right? He is the very picture of discernment. So one look at this kid and he knows he's up to no good. He's Prince Wicked. I mean, even if he says, oh, hi, how are you? What's your name? My name is Old Man in the Forest. What's your name? My name is Prince Wicked. Ding, ding, ding. You don't even need a lot of discernment. It's like he can just tell that this kid is going to be bad news, but he still deals with him in good faith. He doesn't poison him. He doesn't leave him out in the forest like the evil stepmom in Hansel and Gretel. And then after everyone's gone, he goes and checks in on everyone to reconfirm their good faith through the power of voice. He goes to the snake and says, snake, snake, power of voice. Oh, would you like to see the money? No, I'm just checking in. I'll come back. And he reconfirms the deal. He does like a triple handshake, right, to reconfirm the deal. The body, right, never lies, never deals in poor faith. The body is just fine. Right? Everything's there. Everything's ready. We're ready to roll at your word. And also a nice detail that happens is that, just skipping around here, when he's king and he goes back and collects the gold and the money, he does not collect on the grain of rice. And this is a really interesting detail to me, because rice then is the power of discernment. And he doesn't have to activate this because he already has discernment. He's the very picture of discernment. So why is this symbol of picking grains of rice a symbol of discernment? Well, the physics of the thing itself are using your powers of spirit to basically crowdsource, right, all of this nourishment in the form of rice together in one place to focus the power of nourishment, which can really come from embodiment, but also just this instinct that's brought on by grief, by lifelong lived, well-lived, and insight and judgment and all the rest of it. So just looking at it itself, that's how I could read it. But there are other triangulating points in mythic kind of global tradition. The two classics I think of when I think of this gathering of grains as a symbol of discernment. One is Cinderella. Where in the part of the story where one of the trials her evil stepmother puts to her is that she takes a couple of lentils and she throws it in the ash, which is a symbol of grief, of the fireplace, and says, you have to pick out all the lentils, and if you do it by sundown or whatever, I'll let you go to the prince's ball. Of course, she ends up reneging on this deal, so she doesn't deal in good faith. And Cinderella's like, woe is me, I'm never going to get this done. And she goes out to the garden and calls on the power of the birds. Right? This is just like the parrot, who come down. They're like, hey, princess. Oh, sorry, we're not supposed to call you princess. Yes, Cinderella, what would you like us to do for you? And she's like, well, I've got this problem. And the birds all go in and they all pick out the lentils without eating them, put them back into the cup, clean, done, dusted, everything. And Cinderella crosses that trial. And this is a symbol of the power of discernment Cinderella has gained in her time of grieving. In the hearth, in the fireplace, cleaning out the ashes of the fireplace is a classical symbol of grief. Going off like Obi-Wan Kenobi hiding in the hut as an old man is another symbol of grief. And if you need any more proof of that, the name Cinderella literally means cinder is ash, Ella is girl. So this is the power of discernment, of the power of grief, and the title of the story is Cinderella, the Ash Girl. So this Cinderella itself is a story about the power of grief and healing. It's all right there in the title. The other example I think about is from the Greek tradition, from the Odyssey. So Odysseus, at the end of the Odyssey, his final task is that he has to walk inland with his oar over his shoulder. So the oar is like this paddle kind of like thing. With his oar over his shoulder until a stranger, until he goes so far inland that there are people there who don't eat salt and have never seen the sea. They're so far landlocked. And he has to walk with his oar inland until a stranger mistakes his oar for a winnowing fan. A winnowing fan looks just like an oar, except it's this paddle shovel, this flat shovel, where the point is you stick it into a pile of wheat that's just been harvested, and you don't carry it, you don't shovel it, but you flip it up in the air. And when you flip this wheat up in the air, the wind will blow away the chaff, and the wheat falls back down on the pile. So the winnowing fan is you just like shovel up the wheat. The wind, the power of the wind blows away the chaff, and then you get the wheat, which is the nourishment, which is the lentils, which is the grains of rice. And so it's one of my favorite images of, I mean, there's so many in the Odyssey. It's just this miracle of human civilization, the Odyssey. So the symbol of the oar, right, as we know from our poem last week, the Antonio Machado poem, where we said, mankind owns four things that are no good at sea. Rudder, oar, anchor, and the fear of going down, right? And the oar is one of them. And we said last week, the oar is a symbol of you brute forcing your way across the sea, across the river, against the wind, against the waves, and your oar is this like angry young man power of brute forcing your way through everything. Okay. And at the end of the Odyssey, literally at the end of his, I kid you not, Odyssey, it's where the word Odyssey comes from, his oar, his final act is that his oar transforms into a winnowing fan. So he transforms from brute force going against the grain power into a thing that is a tool of discernment. Wheat to separate the wheat from the chaff. And this power of discernment is gained after all his grief in his literally Odyssey all across the Mediterranean Sea. And now with this transformation of oar power into winnowing fan power, he can be a full-powered good king now, and he lives his life into old age with all his grandchildren all around him. And the power of oar is fighting with the wind and spirit, and the winnowing fan is working with the wind, which gives you the power of discernment. And it's an interesting detail here that in the full power version of this transformation, which is this Odyssey winnowing fan thing, when the oar transforms into the winnowing fan, the oar was fighting against the wind, right? The winnowing fan is not just neutralizing the wind where the wind is no longer a factor. The winnowing fan works in the extreme opposite, where it works with the wind. The winnowing fan flips the wheat up, and then the wind, working with you, blows the chaff away. The winnowing fan doesn't work without the wind. You can just flip it up and down, and the wheat and chaff go up and down together. It's only an acknowledging and almost this worshipful, reverential offering of the grain to the wind that the god of wind brings the chaff away, and then you get your discerned, full-powered nourishment of the wheat. So the wind is not neutral in the ultimate transformation. It actually helps you. It is a critical part of how you discern. So that story, Cinderella, and that aspect of the Odyssey are all mythopoetic snippets of different parts of the healing cycle. But the basic physics are the same across all three traditions, right? Of grief, transforming your ego power, your out of control, Prince Wicked ego power, your oar, into the power of discernment, which has to do with the spirit, right? The wind blows the chaff, and the birds, which are equivalent to the wind, come down and give you the grains of rice and pick out the lentils. So even though these stories, Cinderella, Odyssey, and Prince Wicked, are from very, very different traditions, right? The Northern European tradition, the Greek tradition, and the Indian tradition, the Indian Buddhist tradition. The basic physics are all the same across all three traditions because we're all humans. Okay, so with that tangent, sorry. So let's go back to the old man now. When he goes to the city, the king, which is Prince Wicked now, is riding the white elephant, and the elephant is a symbol of embodiment. But I'll just say this is something Gowrie taught me in our call this week. A white elephant is a divine elephant. It's sort of a disembodied elephant, really, because only gods in the Hindu tradition ride white elephants. So when you have a human riding a white elephant, it's this sense of you're overdoing it, right? It's like a Mercedes on top of a Hummer on top of a Tesla. It's comical. It's just really overdone. You're really trying too hard, right? And so when the prince is riding this white elephant, it is it's this it's a symbol of hubris, right? So Prince Wicked is the king, but it's not okay because he's this human riding this white elephant. And so when the old man goes in, the King Wicked reveals the true issue behind his wound, why he's wicked, which is shame. Okay, because the old man comes in, and Prince Wicked does not honor his agreement. Right, so he's the only actor in the story who acts on bad faith. Number one, and number two, he immediately wants the old man killed. And the question, of course, is why does he want the old man to be killed? And the reason is that he is in a state of shame. Now, this is a little bit subtle, but it's why do people act like Prince Wicked? Why do men act in the form of like toxic masculinity? Why are women sort of have this sort of really sort of harsh, evil stepmother side of them that come out? Sort of overweening anger, boundary violation, all the things we do in healing. When people act like that, it is because they have wounds of shame, because they feel that there is something intrinsically within them that is unworthy and that there's something intrinsically wrong with them. And so you need to cover it up, right? Shame steals the tongue you can't speak, and shame hates the daylight, because the last thing I want to happen when I think I'm not worthy is to be seen. So I always want to hide. I always want to do everything under cover of night, even though it's not even that bad, right? I mean, you think about like celebrities and other people who do their insider trading, right? Sort of under cover of night. It's not even that. If you do insider, you just pay a fine, or hopefully you haven't done it sort of too egregiously. But there's all these cases where they lie and they like bribe people to sort of cover up this fact. And as the saying always goes, the cover up ends up being worse than the crime itself. And the reason you cover up is because you are in shame. Which makes sense, because if you're going to drive that hard to like reach celebrity and give up all these other aspects of your life for this kind of fleeting thing, there's a shame wound there, right? There's a shame wound there. So when he wants this old man killed, that is the giveaway factor, that he has this deep wound. It is a wound of shame. Because, right, I mean, what would a normal sort of not in shame person do? First of all, they would come back to the kingdom and say, hey, Dad, this old man like saved my life. And I want to go back and make him prime minister. Is that okay? He doesn't say that. He's silent because he's in shame. And then when he shows up and I'm riding on my white elephant as the king, any normal king would be like, oh my gosh, there you are. Where have you been? I've been looking for you. Everyone, I want you to know that this man is my savior. I wouldn't be here as your king without this poor man. I've sent out search parties. I haven't been able to find him. And here you are now. Welcome. Let me feast you. 3 days of games and like feasts for the whole, kingdom. Happy. And, would you like to be our prime minister or minister of the treasury or whatever, right? He doesn't do that. He does the opposite. He has his servants blindfold him, try to take away his vision, beats him on every corner, abuses the body, and then beheads him, right? Literally trying to separate the intellect, the head, from the body. The exact opposite of what the poor man did with him, where he tried to bring him back into concert with the three animals by cooking them all, warming them in the cooking pot of his hut. So another thing to say here, another connection. This is from Gowrie, from our brainstorm, is that this feeling of then that it is shame itself that deactivates discernment. Right? When you're in shame, you do all these things that like kind of make no sense. I mean, there's a whole session we could do on that concept, right? But I think the key point of this story is, for me, the dynamics between shame and discernment. The one critical thing you lose when you're driven by shame, you lose discernment. You are disconnected from your own vision. You stuff down your life forces, and you disconnect from the voices of your body. You disconnect from embodiment. And the thing that heals shame and restores discernment is grief. Because it's the poor man, the frog, in exile in the forest, and he's happy staying there, right? It's the wise men of the village, of the kingdom, that elevate him to king. And you can argue that it was actually demotion, because he was probably happier in his hut in the village, in the forest. And what grief says, shame says, nobody look. I'm the best at everything. Nobody needs to help me. I have the best words. I have the best memory. I have the best everything, right? And grief says, if I'm not worthy, so be it. I'll be in my hut in the forest in case anybody needs me. Grief, in other words, accepts shame. It doesn't deny it. And because of that, it disarms shame. Right? And that's, you're not doing this as a gambit, as a clever gambit to disarm shame. You don't care about disarming shame. You're like, if I'm not worthy, so be it. I'm fine with everybody seeing how unworthy I am. And that's okay. That's okay. But when you say that, it's because you actually feel worthy, that you feel okay to say that. And so how to heal shame is a whole sort of other topic that is kind of even outside mythopoetics. But shame is a threat. It is fear and a sneaking suspicion that something is intrinsically wrong with me that cannot be fixed. So you try to control your life to shield, soothe, everything. So shame is threat, fear, and control. Shame is profane. Shame is profane. Grief is of the sacred, which says, all right, if something's wrong with me, that's all right. Oh, it's a threat. I'm afraid. That's okay. It's okay that I'm afraid. It's okay that I'm screwed. It's okay that I'm afraid, and I may, even worse things may happen to me. All right, it is what it is. And grief in the sacred holds space for shame. The old man in the forest, the poor man, extends hospitality to embodiment and the ego-driven bully shame wound alike, and heals them all together. Okay. Grief takes you down this flood of insight and puts you into direct confrontation and encounter and engagement with all these other realms of you, the snake, the parrot, and the rat. This old man who has the power of discernment because of his time alone in the hut, who has gone through grief, and who, by the way, right, it's no accident that he also has this mystic power. He has been in grief. He's not afraid of anything, because it's like, I'm not afraid of anything because I'm okay with anything. I'm okay with dying. I'm okay with people rejecting me because I love myself as I am without condition. So when there's these big transformational floods, and it's like, oh, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? He doesn't think of himself. He's just like, oh, there are people there and they need me. There are these parts of me that are still lost. Oh, that's no problem. I'll just dive in and go get them. And onlookers I mean, there are no onlookers because he's in exile. But you can imagine people, well, what if you die? And it's like, well, that's all right. I mean, in that hut, I'm basically already dead, and I'm already okay. So in the afterlife, I'll probably be all right too, or I'll find my way to being all right. It's going to be all right. The additional power he has is also that he carries with him, and this makes sense that he has all these powers because of what we're talking about. The power of voice. He says when he's being beaten, not, oh, help me, whatever, whatever. He's like, yep, I thought so. It was better to save animals than a prince. This is just like the raven saying, this will never do. This will never do. He's not saying this as an entreaty. Right? Not, there he is, go get him. He already knew this before, because in the hut, he attended to the animals before the prince. He is here in this engagement with the prince, with the shame wound. He is simply speaking his truth for no good reason. This is the truth he knew right from the beginning of the story, and he simply speaks this truth for no good reason. Better to save animals than a prince. Better to put my power and attention with and cast my lot with insight, resourcefulness, and discernment in embodiment, in my body, not even my mind, than to follow the path led on by my emotional wounds of shame. Right? That's the wisdom of the old man. Better to light the fire and focus on insight, resourcefulness, and discernment first, and be in no rush to leave the hut in my body, than to follow the path, the panicked, rushing around, busy all the time, manic path led on by my emotional wounds of shame, which is Prince Wicked. Finally, the wise men, the other wise forces in you, catch on to this. They ask him, there's something about this old man when he comes back, something about his discernment and good faith. that they believe him, and then they kill Prince Wicked. They transform the Wicked. So Wicked is transformed into the old man as king, right? This is transformation, driven by the power of voice, the power of discernment, the power of grieving, the power of all the time out in the forest, and the power of the mystic not being afraid to swim through the waters that he's perfectly comfortable in because of all of this time. It's a beautiful diorama of the physics of healing within you, because these are all parts of you. These are all parts of you. So the physics of this healing is interesting. There's this exiled part of you that deals in good faith and prioritizes insight, resourcefulness, and discernment when he has finally come back into the headquarters of inner self, right, of the kingdom. His voice is unmistakable, even though he's like a frog, even though Odysseus is like a frog. Nausicaa can tell there's something special about him, right? Even though the bully tries to beat him down, there is something about the first cycle of transformation in the hut where the prince failed, right? He could have brought the animals back himself, but he failed to reconnect with resourcefulness, insight, and spirit and discernment. So you fail the first trial, and the next trial in the kingdom, there is an even more massive transformation where discernment comes in the form of the old man, takes your word, deals with you in good faith, you deal in bad faith, and your entire self erupts in revolt, and there's a massive transformation. Or you think about it, there are two transformations in the story. The river, which seems like the big one, but it failed, right? The prince did not transform. And then the other flood and storm was the uprising of the people, right? And you see this all the time in life. It's like, okay, we're going to give you some anxiety, nervous stomach about this direction in life you're going on. And you ignore it. You take all this antacid and you stuff it down. It's like, okay, all right, then we'll turn the voltage on the cattle prod up just a little bit. We don't want to crank it all the way because we love you. We don't want to hurt you. We just want you to get the message. So we crank up the voltage up a little bit. Then you start to have scary dreams that you forget. Then the dreams become scary. Crank it up a little more. You wake up at 3 a.m. You're terrified, but you've lost your mythopoetic, literacy. You can't read the dream. You say, forget it. Or you take a sleeping pill and stuff all that down. It's like, I don't want to, it's all for the good. I have to go to work the next day. So I don't want these dreams. It's like, that's fine. If this is the way you have to do it, this is the way you have to do it. The voltage on the cattle prod goes up even more. And you start to get a rash. You have issues at work, right? You start doing what, your caregivers and physicians start calling self-sabotage. I don't know why you're self-sabotaging. Just try to be happy. Maybe you should meditate or something, right? And none of this works because you are fundamentally on the wrong path of life. And this is hypothetical. I have no idea what you're actually doing. Right? But I know you're on the wrong path because your body is revolting, because your dreams are coming to you, and you're actively stuffing them down. So something's happening. I don't know what. You look fine to me, but I'm not inside. I'm not inside your inner kingdom. And so, yeah, it's just a beautiful, beautiful kind of thing. Another one of the hallmarks here of the wicked part of you, or even of society, if you want to sort of reflect this out into society at large, is that the prince wicked part of you will mistakenly think that they are just themselves and not a part of the larger inner kingdom. That is when you are a horrible king, right? When you think, I don't know how I got here, but it's all about me. I'm eating well, I'm sleeping well, and I don't care about the rest of the kingdom. The kingdom is you, right? In America here, in the US where I live, right? I'm one person and I'm doing okay for now, but I look out upon me, right? Upon the body politic of this country. And what I see are, my countrymen and countrywomen in various states of disruption. And they are me, right? As a citizen of this country, my countrymen are me. My countrywomen are me. And you can say the same thing about, the sort of entire world stage. So it's like in any country, any given citizen not realizing that every other citizen is him or her. And if they fail, the entire kingdom goes south. This is one of the tragedies of the racial issue in the United States, where we don't realize that we are each other at this deep mythopoetic level. So the new king gets installed. He retrieves the superpowers. He brings back the animals to live in his palace in their right place of honor. We were on the wrong track before. We pushed too far. And now it took 2 big waves of transformation and bringing back this exiled part of us, just like the Frog King, right? And now we are brought back to our senses, literally, our animals, or the embodiment is back. And we are brought back to our powers of discernment in the form of, like, the discernment is the king running the kingdom now, not the shame wound running the king, being the king and running the kingdom. But the way you get there is not through intellectualization and saying, oh, ha, 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 well, I'm Prince Wicked and this is bad, so I should read a lot of books and do a lot of courses and everything will be fixed. A hallmark of the story is that the way you get back up on top is you go all the way down and back again, right? Or Prince Wicked gets a chance at transformation. He fails, and then the next one takes him down all the way, right? Because he pushes too far. The white elephant is the signal sort of characteristic of full hubris. He's pushing too far. And so it's not, again, don't read it unless you want to. You do what you want, right? If you read it allegorically, right, you will say, well, pride cometh before a fall, and he went too far. If you read it symbolically, that Prince Wicked did all these things is a natural part of the cycle. You go too far, pride is part of the cycle, and the fall after pride is part of the cycle. It is this diorama of, like, the life cycle of an acorn through an oak tree. And it's painful as hell, but it is the natural cycle. It reminds me of this quote from William Blake, which I think the way he said it, I'm not going to get it right, but he said something along the lines of, a fool who persists in his folly will become wise, right? And it makes you wonder how the old man got into the hut as an exile in the first place. Was he a Prince Wicked before? So this is within your own self. Your body revolts, your luck revolts, your insight starts to, like, hit back at you. All these things revolt to topple the illusion that this part of you, this Prince Wicked part of you, is a separate thing from the rest of you, because it is not. You are a whole being. Your body included, your spirit included, your intellect, and your shame wounds, all included, are a part of you. And they are all worthy of your unconditional love. Even Prince Wicked is worthy of your unconditional love. You're like, well, he's so wicked. But yeah, but if you have the power of discernment, what did the old man do who has the power of discernment? He rescued Prince Wicked. And he wasn't the one who ordered his death. It was the spontaneous revolt of everyone else that said, no, we're turning the wheel and we're putting him in front, right? No more. No more of that. We're going to do this. We're turning over a new leaf. So all these things revolt to topple the illusion that this part of you is a separate thing from the rest of you, driving your life out of fear. That's Prince Wicked, driving the bus of your life out of fear, threat, and control, and then overdoing it, and that leads to this transformation. I could also almost argue that if you don't overdo it, that would be the worst case, because the wheel would not fully turn, and you'd be stuck in this sort of, 50 years of a mediocre life. Right. And even there, you hold space for that. In the sacred, it's like, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Prince Wicked, in this case, overdoes it. And his bullying, overdoes his bullying, and the wheel turns into a massive transformation. The fool has become wise through this, fall after pride. Now, again, don't take this as an allegory. Like, oh, Artie said I should go crazy and like go on a bender and then everything will be fine after. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. Right? Take it as a symbol, an illustration of how these things tend to spontaneously work within you. And the key is, I mean, so you're like, okay, so how do I exercise discernment? It's everything we've talked about all throughout this series. It's like, give power to your voice, even inside of you, to tell yourself how you're actually feeling. But in this case, it really is, and in many other stories, actually, the act and the attitude of dealing in good faith, right? Dealing in good faith. You have this scare, and you say, oh my gosh, if you just get me through this, God, whoever, praying to yourself, praying to God, I promise I'll do X, Y, Z. And then the thing clears up, and you're like, oh, it was fine after all. So I don't need to like go through on my promise, right? It's like that joke. I wonder, I forgot who said this. This is not me, but this is a great illustration. It's like you're looking for your car keys and you think, oh God, if you just help me find my car keys, I promise I'll be a good person from now on. And then you look and your car keys are on the couch right there and you say, oh, never mind, I got my car keys, right? And it's like, no, you made a deal and the car keys appeared and you now want to renege on the deal, right? That's Prince Wicked. And that's not discernment. That's not discernment. Okay, so it's 11:30. Those are the main bulk of the notes I had. Gary, are you there? Do you want to come back up? I'd love to get you into this conversation. Hello.
Hi. That was just such a holistic summary of what the story was about. That
I love this story.
It's just amazing how it kind of distilled into one thing, which is how shame cuts off discernment, and discernment comes back up when grief heals shame. So there is that lovely relationship of these three things that goes on. Yeah. Thank
you. That's not quite how I said it, but I like your version. Your version is more correct. What else? Did you have other thoughts that came to you while?
I mean, I found it interesting while you were discussing the dynamics of the inner life forces, in that all the other life forces kind of revolt and rebel and overthrow the king. At this moment when they realize that, all this while, of course, right from the start of the story, they all knew what Prince Wicked was capable of. Yeah. They all kind of worried about it. They said, oh, what if he just continues this way when he becomes king? And how is he going to make a good king? They talk about it. It's not a secret. Everyone knows.
That's right. And they tried leaving him in the river the first time. So there were two attempts in his life, actually. Interesting.
To die. Yeah. They tried subtly to kind of get away from him and all of that. So it's not a secret, but the moment of truth arrives at that, at that instance, when they realize, the whole bad faith deal. And they say, if he could do this to the poor man, he could do it to everyone and anyone. And it's the realization that they could be cut off, the life force could be cut off from, the higher vision at any moment, is when they say, this won't do. We need to take action right now. I found that really interesting as to how, if we notice the physics of our own lives and the moments when crisis hits, or the moments when we're pushed to kind of change the way we look at what we're doing, it all almost made me wonder, what moment was it when some part of me realized, if we continue this way, you're going to kill us, right? You're just going to exile us out into a far, far away galaxy, and I'm not going to let that happen. So we need to take a U-turn. So it's kind of interesting for me. So that's the point that the story says. This is when it happens.
I love that. It's almost like the point where you voice, like Raven did in the last story, that this will not do. This state of affairs will not do.
Yeah, yeah.
When very reasonably, it's like the beginning of the world and everything's dark. You could say, well, it's always been like this. So what are you even talking about?
Yeah, yeah.
And Raven voices the truth. And it's like, I don't care if this is the way it's always been. This is not okay.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, even here, when the prince has always been like this, just deal with it. You know, you could have, they could have turned back to the poor man and said, "Oh, we're very sorry that you had to go through this, but you know, that's our king." So, but at that point, they say, "Well, this kind of bad faith dealing threatens our own existence." And that is the point when they kind of turn around. So as long as they feel that they can somehow put up with it and still exist, it's okay. But the moment they realize, you know, there is no guarantee of existence, that's when it's not okay. And what that says to me in some ways is how much is what you've said on many occasions, is how much each life force within us wants to be part of the whole, you know, decision making in driving our life, in guiding us through life. Every actor and every archetype and every kind of life force within us wants to be part of the table. They want equal kind of standing, and they want to be heard, and they want, you know, to have a say in things. And it is when you threaten that very thing, where you say you have no place at the table, and I don't know you, that is the one thing that they fear, that they don't want to happen. So it's
even
kind
after
of touching in
you
a way.
saved me.
Yeah.
Even after you had me at your mercy and you saved me. Interesting.
Yeah.
What else?
So yeah, so that's the kind of thing that Kate. I think it's a really, really powerful story, in the sense that when you sit with it and you think of all these things, it just makes me think of, okay, what life force, what part of me have I been kind of pushing away and not listening to, and dealing with bad faith even. I mean, it's just so scary to think of it when you think of it from the perspective of this story. So it's a really, really powerful story. Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you to your muse for selecting it for us.
Would you like to share the exercise for this week?
Okay, yeah. Let's do the exercise. So, what we thought would be the exercise, a fun exercise for this week. And again, these are just some prompts. No expectation of participation, only if you want. But if you want, the questions you could ask yourself are, and the way you would do this is, you would do this alone. You'd budget maybe 10 minutes alone time sometime this week, either at home, or if your home is sort of crowded, when you drive out to the supermarket, as you park, before you get out, you just sit an extra 5 or 10 minutes with some pen and paper, and you do these exercise questions. Okay. And some questions that I think would be interesting are, number one, to ask yourself, are there any areas in your life where you may be pushing things too far? Pushing things too far, however you define it. If you ask yourself that question, whatever pops into your head, just run with it, just like write. Where you are brute forcing things, even against increasing resistance and revolt within you. Using your Odysseus oar, as an oar to brute force and not as a winnowing fan. Okay. And again, if you use your oar as an oar, that's no problem. It's like 99% of the Odyssey, he's using his oar as an oar, not as a winnowing fan. It's only at the very end, after this huge, literally circumambulation all around the Mediterranean and even down into the underworld, I think twice, right? And in a manner of speaking. So that's the question. Where you have been saying, I have to keep doing it this way because this is how we've always done it. And there's a rising flood within you saying, no, no, no. And then a second question, to what extent have things been turned upside down in your life, in big ways, in small ways, by the trickster? And we've talked all about the trickster in the last 3 sessions. Where you have, just like with the river, you have been forced to come back into engagement and encounter with your inner powers of discernment, with your inner old man of the forest. And a question to ask, if you find your own version of the old man, and this will be familiar to those of you who have done healing with me. What is the vision of this part of you for your life going forward? Right. So you say to the old man, if I made you king, what would be different? What would be different? And you might say, well, that's very harsh. You're like actually negotiating with the old man. Well, I mean, again, as we've said in so many stories, it's okay to bargain, right? It's okay to bargain, but you just want to bargain in good faith, right? If you say you give me this, I'll give you that. When you get it, you've got to do it. You've got to do it. So you can have a conversation with the old man and say, what is your vision for our life going forward? If you were king, if you were driving the bus of our life solo as king, how would our life look different? Paint me a picture. And then he or she, right, will paint you a picture. And then the final step of the exercise is to compare that vision of your life with your current path of life. And to the extent that they are highly divergent, I would argue, again, and I have no stake, I have no idea of the details. I'm just giving you this as a hypothetical. But archetypally, if the old man of the forest is like, well, this is obviously the vision of your life, this is obviously why you're here on the planet, and you look at your existing life and you're like going in this direction or in this direction, it doesn't mean you have to do this. Okay, this is not allegorical. But if this is the sort of diff between the proper vision of your life and where you're going, then you have some sense of why the floodwaters and the storm waters and all the pressure and containment is like applying itself to you to try to get you over to this. Right? This is the vision that has come from intuition, from sacred space, from the divine, whatever. But let me just say, in our defense as mere mortals, okay, the muses don't live here. They don't have to deal with, I can hear them all like rolling their eyes now, okay? They don't have to like deal with all the things we deal with. So we're like this because, we're not stupid. There are reasons we're like this. And as they try to push you back toward this, it's like, do you know what will happen? Do you know what things in my life will blow up if I even move like halfway toward this vision? And they're like, yeah, we know. We talked about this before we sent you. You said, okay, so now we want you to do it. And it's like, oh, you're going to pull that one on me again. So again, the point here is not to say, oh, you better do it. And not to say, oh, screw them, just go on your own way. It's like they are powerful. They have discretion. They have the ability to send trickster, to send all these forces to like mess with you. But the good news is that we know from all these dioramas of healing from other stories that they will deal with you in good faith. You can negotiate with them. You can say, look, I want to, who wouldn't love this vision of life? but I'm terrified. I don't even know, like, tomorrow for this meeting, I don't even know what I'm going to do there, let alone like reset the vision of my entire life. And they're kind of looking at you expectantly. And then you realize after you've done this a few rounds, what they're waiting for you is an authorization. Or they're waiting for you to say, well, they're like, and after a while, after a few decades, you realize, oh, right, sorry. And can you help me? And they're like, ding, ding, ding. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. They can't do anything until you ask, precisely because you are the sovereign of your life.
Yeah.
Not any guides or magical forces, right? They're your coaches. They're all the armchair quarterbacks, owner of the team calling in, telling you how to call the play. You are the quarterback on the field. You call the play. You call the play, right? These ancestors, they had their time on the field. And that's why they're so wise, because they fumbled the ball. They messed up. They lost. They went down in flames. And now you have the ball in your time. And it's fine for you to mess up too. But when they're calling in, you are the one, you are the sovereign. They can only help if you say, help me. And you may not want to say, you're like, no. Flood, kingdom revolt, you've helped enough. I'm good on my own for the next like 10 years, right? But that is up to you. That is up to you. That's why sacred space is so important. I'm not here haranguing you, telling you, oh, you better do this and you better be a good healing person and get your life on track and follow your bliss. No, there is no fear, threat, or control. You don't even have to listen to the session. You don't even have to do the exercise or chat or ask questions. Not because I'm being a good guy, but because you are the sovereign of your life. And if I speak truth, right, because I have to try to, because I'm trickster, I'm setting the sacred space, then I have to acknowledge that. Right? I can't deal with you falsely, or I'll be in trouble the next flood or kingdom revolt. So anyway, that's the exercise. Try it out only if you want. Only if you want. But could be fun. Anything to add?
That seems, like I said, it's a scary thought to even sit with yourself and saying, what's the vision of my life saying, and what am I doing, and have I really bullied and pushed away some sacred and powerful life forces within me? Is it's a powerful way to think.
It's terrifying. I mean,
yeah.
Let's just say this. If you're sitting there going like, oh, hell no, then you are, I would say, comprehending what we are describing. If you're like, yep, no, that's fine. I'll just stay in the back of the classroom and take a 0. I don't want to go up to the blackboard. Not for that. And you're like, yeah, that sounds great, but hell no, not for me. Then you're getting it.
Yeah.
If you're not terrified, you're like, oh, that would be so intellectually interesting. It's like, oh, you're gonna you're gonna be on the log next, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay. It's okay to be afraid. It's a sane reaction to be
to be afraid of what's coming up.
It is.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Artie. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. So, okay, should we close the session? We've got about 10 minutes left.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. All right, so that's it. Thank you again, Gary. I love it when she reads our stories for us. And so now that's it. That's the story, the talk, and the exercise. And I'll go ahead and close the session. So our next session is next Sunday. Feel free to invite others. It's free, open to the public. Let me just put the link up for you on Crowdcast, and I'll put the link up for you on Facebook. And so please feel free to invite others. You don't have to, but it's always, the more the merrier for all of us, but only if you want. Okay, so then I'll go ahead and also close our session. So I hereby close this session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me and with us. And thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, and the spiritual nourishment of the shared sacred space with us. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great day, have a great week, and I will see you in the next session. Thank you. Thank you.